You're listening to Online Pet Health Podcasts with Dr. Megan Kelly. Continuing education for veterinarian rehabilitation therapists. Learn more at onlinepethealth.com.
Hey Vet Rehabbers! This week we revisit the business panel from last year's Vet Rehab Summit. It was lectured by Whitney Hischier from UC Berkeley, and she chatted to us about building a strategy for your business. Now, we are currently busy with our qualifiers in the Vet Rehab Summit Facebook pop-up group. It's our 30-day build-up to the Vet Rehab Summit Day, which is the 13th of November. So I invite all of you guys to come and join us in this Facebook group for live trainings and key conversations about our profession. It's free and it's open to the whole vet rehab community. If you're listening to this on the day of the podcast was released, you can look forward to a lecture by Laurie McCauley. If you could choose one modality, what would it be? And then next week, it'll be a one by Chris Zink, Undertaking Research in Your Practice. All the recordings and CPD certificates for these lectures are available in our members portal for the Online Pet Health members and in our free zone for our non-members. Before we learn more about building the right strategy for our business, a quick word from our sponsors. Choosing the right therapy laser and PEMF systems for your practice are big decisions, and that's why our Response System has been helping to make that decision easier for over 35 years by offering Class 3B and Class 4 lasers, as well as a full line of PEMF products designed for both small animals and horses. All their systems are fully rechargeable and adapted to international grids. You can find out more at responsesystems.com. You can also come and chat to Response Systems on the 13th of November at our Vet Rehab Summit. And you can find out more information about it at www.vetrehabsummit.com. Over to Whitney.
Well, welcome everyone. I'm thrilled to be here. And if I can ask everyone, I want this to be as interactive as possible. Probably best to be on mute, but use the chat function, and we'll have points here for discussion as well. This is much about you sort of interacting with each other and sharing practices as my providing a little bit of content. So the goal here today is to cover quite a bit of material in a short period of time, but my experience working with people in the veterinary field is that most of you have a pretty short attention span when it comes to this, so I want to keep it as punchy as possible. We're going to talk a little bit about strategic planning and strategy, kind of what is this concept that gets thrown around all the time, and how do we use it to benefit growing our practices. We'll talk a little bit about this thing called product market fit, figuring out the right customer and the value you bring to them, and being pretty focused about that, trying to not be all things to all people. We'll get a little bit into time management and how decision making can be made more efficient and tied to strategy, and finally wrap up with some metrics for success. So just a little bit more about me. As you heard, I'm a super user of veterinary services. I teach in the business school at UC Berkeley. I'm actually also right now in a One Health Master's program at the vet school at University of Edinburgh. So that's been really fun for me in terms of learning more about zoonotic disease and working with veterinarians around the world. And I'm not the only animal person in my family. That's my daughter in the lower left. Also, pretty large user of rehabilitation services. I've got 2 horses right now, unfortunately, with EPM. So we've been using acupuncture and shockwave and massage and chiropractic quite heavily to try to rehabilitate them. So let's talk a little bit about this term strategy. It gets thrown around a lot. It gets put in front of a term. You add strategic to anything and suddenly it sounds more important, more effective. My view of strategy is obviously it's a plan to achieve a goal, but it's a series of choices that you make, and they're intentional. And it's about what you choose not to do. One of the challenges I think many of us have, and particularly in the field that you're in, is trying to be all things to all people. And this can cause burnout. It can cause poor work-life balance. And in the worst case scenario, it's a lot of work, but you're not actually financially making a sustainable business. The key here is to have a plan, because if you don't, you may end up somewhere that you don't actually want to be. And I'm just curious, and this is sort of our first chat question, to hear from you. So what do you think your biggest challenges are with having a strategy for your practice? And if I could just ask folks to jump in here on the chat, one word or even a sentence, what's the most sort of difficult or frustrating part about having the time to think strategically about your business or creating a strategy for your business? Staff. Yeah. Danielle, if you want to take yourself off mute for a moment, what's the challenge around staff?
It's just been a rough week. So that's the first word that came to
It's true
mind.
for all of us. Yep.
I've gone from myself and a part-time tech to, I think there's 11 of us now properly. So,
but I see that for a few of you, and that is hard, right? Because also everyone has a different perspective depending upon where they sit in the organization and how they feel it should be focused, as well as sort of personal and professional preferences that may vary. Time, yeah, I see that across the board here. So having time to sit down and kind of think through this and write about it, that's time that you're taking away from perhaps seeing clients or for working with staff or for other things. So there's always an opportunity cost behind it. And that's what we'll talk a little bit about today in terms of how can you tackle this in a series of simple ways. So it's not this big kind of piece of overhead, but rather I'm going to give you some like one-page tools that you can just do at your leisure, but they tie together and just start the process of thinking about this. For those of you that are part of teams as well, this can be something that like in a next office meeting, you could actually hand out and have each person complete one to compare and contrast in terms of how people perceive things, but also to just facilitate the discussion about where do we think we are versus where we want to be and what do we need to close that gap, because it shouldn't all come down to you. If you're the leader of the practice, everyone needs to be engaged. All right, thanks for that. So a lot of good input. And as my dressage trainer likes to tell me, you don't go into the arena at a competition and sort of hope and pray it all works out, right? Hoping and praying is not a strategy. And most of us don't have the silver bullet. Sorry, I'm a big Game of Thrones fans. We don't have a dragon in our back pocket that will kind of magically solve things, annihilate the competition, or just provide us with that sort of huge value proposition that everyone comes to us without marketing. So in strategic planning, it's usually a sequence of steps. And I just want to share this as kind of a boring slide, but just to show that like it is sort of a process. It doesn't need to be done all at once, but these are the things you want to think about. So first of all, why do you exist? Now this sounds super existential, but it's actually not, right? I mean, in some ways you're there because you're creating a living for you, for your team. You want to provide better care to the animals in your area. This may be an extension of an existing veterinary practice. So you're trying to kind of build out the swath of services that you offer and not just offer kind of primary care. But think about that, like why do you exist? And then you want to think about like gathering intelligence. So often you get this just through talking with clients daily. You may get it through networking with others in the area that are in your field, some of the meetups like this. Who are the customers and what are their needs? Are they changing? Are new people coming into the area and competing with you? Are there pricing pressures because of economic demands? What is dynamic in the environment that you might need to respond to? And then step 3 is, okay, well, how do we do that? And that's what I want to simplify for you. So it doesn't need to be this 1,000-page document that just sits on a shelf, but actually a series of thought processes and tools. Finally, how do you implement this? So this gets into decision making. Every day when you and your team come to work and you make decisions, you have to prioritize. You don't have enough time. You may not have enough resources. So every decision should flange up with that goal, that strategy. And then how do you know that you're successful? So I'll give you a template at the end to talk about metrics for success. Now I know I'm making this sound a little bit easy, but it's not. I appreciate that. And it's an ongoing process. It doesn't happen just once and it's done. So here's a sample of a very simple template that you could have to facilitate a meeting with your team or just think about on your own. And you'll have all these slides as takeaways. So you'll have them for yourself to fill out. Think about why you exist. And it could be overall. You could also think about it in the context of time. Like, what do you plan to do in the next year? Maybe grow the business twofold, maybe just sustain revenue. Maybe some of you are in the position of wanting to sell your practices. What are some key things you're going to do to achieve this? And it's not a laundry list, but keep it to like 3, maybe 5, because we can't remember more than that normally anyway. And it should be pretty simple stuff. Most of us, it's around physical facilities. So in your case, if you do have capital equipment or actual facilities, some of you may not, you may just go directly to your clients. Marketing, we'll get a little bit into marketing today. What do you need to do to get people aware of what you are offering? Because marketing is something that is an ongoing process. It's not a thing you can just turn on and off at will. And then financially, how are you going to manage your cash flow? And I know that's a challenge across the industry, whether it's collecting fees at the time of service or just following up with clients in terms of payment. So now we're going to talk a little bit about part 2, which is product market fit. And what is this sort of weird businessy sounding term? So the term product market fit, it really just means you know who your customer is. So product market fit, just to repeat, is the concept that you know who exactly your customer is and the value that you bring to them. And it's very specific compared to perhaps where they could get services from competitors or from substitutions. So this is what I like to think about in terms of demographic, right? And the demographics can range from like the age and gender of your patients. Now these could be also the people paying your bills, right? Because for most of us, your actual client is a human being, even though you're servicing an animal, because they pay the bills, because they're the ones you have to deal with. And so when you market, you're really marketing to the human to get to the animal. And think about it in terms of who is interested in your services, who owns the types of animals that you'd be working on. And there may fall into certain brackets, right, in terms of gender, in terms of the level of education that they have, clearly income, because they have to be able to pay for this, and then also animal use type. So my examples here are equine, and I know you will all be doing a range of cats and dogs and equine and perhaps even exotics. But just to take the equine for an example, there's 3 very different customer segments here. You've got the top performance horse, where the owner is probably not concerned about price point, but very much on technology. And I see this with our competition horses at our barn. They want the latest in laser. They want to understand how we can integrate acupuncture with supplements. We want to understand, if we have the horses in rehab, where we can actually take them to have access to aqua rehab facilities versus just sitting in a stall. Now, that's very different from the backyard pony, where the parents may be more concerned about how you interact with their kid, right? This is about bedside manner and compassion. They might be a bit concerned about pricing, but really what they want to make sure is that they have someone who is sensitive and taking the time to talk with them about what the plan is for perhaps their child's best friend. And then at the bottom, this may not be a customer segment you deal with at all, is sort of the farmer, where animals are not considered a family member, are really seen on a cost per head basis. And pricing is very important. Top technology may not be, and bedside manner, not so much. So the key thing here is, well, can you service all 3 types at one time? Or do you want to distinguish? Because it's really hard to be all things to all people. And that's where we get into this concept of value proposition. What is that? What is that need that your customer has that you can uniquely fill? And if we think about this, it falls into 2 categories. So painkiller or gain creator. Are you solving a pain for your client, right? And in literally, you guys are, right? I often use these terms more for maybe tech businesses, but in your case, you're actually helping take the pain away from perhaps a dog with arthritis. you're helping reduce the emotional anxiety in a family where they see that they have a pet that's actually in pain or can't get up the stairs or can't go on hikes. Or, in the equine case, like we can't compete, we can't do the fun things we enjoy with our horses. So when you think about how you position your practices and put yourself in the shoes of your customer, the human customer, what's the thing that they most want to get out of your services? And this may be, episodic and one time, like I just need you to do acupuncture this one time to see if it will help my cat. Or it could be an ongoing relationship. But at the end of the day, you're solving a need or a want that your customer has. And we like to think of this in terms of magnitude, right? You're not doing a nice to have. Nice to have businesses are the first things to go when people have other priorities, including, economic challenges or time issues. So on the left, we have a non-malarial mosquito, right? A mosquito bite is a problem that bothers you, but you don't necessarily change how you work, how you live, or what you would pay to make it go away, versus a shark bite is of significant magnitude. Like if we don't solve this, in the worst case, the animal might pass away. And, in the best case, we could actually rehabilitate it to its full, kind of lifestyle working capacity. So if I can ask folks here for just a moment to share in the chat, what do you think the value proposition is that you bring to your clients or customers? If you had to boil it down to a single word or just one sentence, what is the value that you bring to them? And this may be something that you've already thought quite a bit about because it's part of your marketing messaging, because it's on your website. But just to be, yeah, vet-owned facility, okay, right? Because that can be seen as additional credibility. Quality of life, absolutely. Guidance and support, right? And think about this not from the perspective of you and your business, but from the perspective of your client. What do they care about? And this is something too, you'll pick up talking with clients when you're in, a visit, or you can even survey them, right? Harriet, thank you for that. Like if they feel that education and what they can do in between visits on their own is really important, then that's helpful. That really helps in terms of your marketing messaging. One thing, we know, and this is true, at least here in the States right now, I'm based here in California, but I suspect it's true globally. With the pandemic, a lot of people have run out and either purchased or adopted new animals. So there's just a huge increase in demand for veterinary services because people are at home and they notice that, the dog has an itchy ear or that the cat's not eating enough. So they're going to be going to the vet for services they wouldn't normally. And I imagine this is true for rehabilitation as well, because suddenly you notice it's harder for, say, the animal to get on and off the sofa, et cetera. So this is a really actually interesting, if you find opportunity in crisis, a great window of time to get more connected with your clients, because you can probably have more interactions with them and get a better sense of what they find important. Emotional stability is so important for us right now because everything else is so chaotic and stressful. And if that pet or that companion animal is seen as the ticket to helping feel better, people are going to spend a lot more time and money to make sure that that pet, is healthy and lives long than maybe they would in other times. So this connection here, and I'm showing you a tool called the Business Model Canvas. We're not going to spend much time in it, but this is a way of getting a snapshot of your practice in one page, right? Rather than having this long strategic sort of plan. The idea here is that if you look at these 9 quadrants, those on the right face your customers, those on your left are all the operating activities. And this thing in the middle called value proposition is the heart of what makes your practice work, right? It's the reason you exist from the customer's perspective. And when you're able to link up the specific customer segment with the specific value that they see, that's called product market fit. So again, another tool you might take, have fun with it, see what you can fill out, and see where you are right now versus where you would want to shift your practice to be. Another maybe more simplified template here to use, which is just, again, to fill out who are the different customers you serve? Do we know what problems they have? And from their perspective, what's the value that I bring? What's the value that our practice brings? And so to take this a step further and get into the marketing concept, this is called the Get, Keep, Grow funnel. And the idea here is that it's a funnel. We have to reach out to a lot more people than those that actually ultimately purchase the services, right? So that funnel on the left of Get, that's the marketing aspect. And some of you may have really successful marketing campaigns. Some of you may not do any at all and still get tons of clients in the door. And we'll talk about that in a minute. Once they get in the funnel, once they finally get to that yellow piece here where they purchase, how the heck do you keep them, right? In the ideal world, they just say, see my pet every few weeks. I want to be on a regular schedule, right? It's like your haircut. But that doesn't always happen. And we see heavy churn, right? Where people just come in once and they go away. And that's not great for you. It usually takes 5x more resources, mostly in terms of money, to get a client in the door than to keep them. So you do all this heavy lifting to get that client, you really want to keep them. And what's the trick to keep? It's communication. And for you, because ideally you're going to be working with these same clients for years over the life of their animal, you want to think about this in terms of what are the changing needs that my client has for their pet over time. Because as they get older, there may be more needs to treat things like arthritis. They may be acquiring additional pets in the family, right? So you just get a lot more information that helps you grow the relationship. And this may also reflect larger growth in your practice where you're adding on new services, and they can relate specifically to rehabilitation like boarding. They could be grooming. They can just be, including capital equipment acquisition if there's new equipment and new machines that you bring on board that can help with rehabilitation. When we think about this in business speak from a calculation perspective, this get portion of the funnel is called a CAC. Sounds horrible. It stands for customer acquisition cost. For every customer you get in the door, how much money do you spend to do that? And most of the time it's around marketing. Some marketing is quote unquote free, although it still takes time to put it together, and you could translate that into somebody's salary where they have to put that Facebook page together or that ad or that tweet, or take the time to attend a conference where you have brochures handed out. All that added together, divided by the number of actual customers it results in, is called your customer acquisition cost. And I'm just curious, and please put in the chat, how many of you actually have a sense of what it takes, what it costs per customer you bring in the door, what your CAC is? And don't worry, most people actually don't have a good sense of this. It's something that you can track, but what's really important here is that, okay, and it might be pretty low, excellent. You know what it is because what you're really trying to figure out is the lifetime value of the customer. And this isn't necessarily of the pet, of the animal, but of the owner, because they're going to maybe have multiple animals that over time they bring to you. The lifetime value is over the amount of time someone works with you, whether it's one pet or another they own, how much money will they spend with you? Right? So I can probably think of the chiropractor I work with my horse. I worked with her for 8 years. I probably spend $1,000 with her a year. So far my lifetime value has been about $8,000. And if she and I continue to work together for the next 8, then my lifetime value to her is about $16,000. How much has she spent to get me through that customer acquisition? I have no idea, because it wasn't due to marketing, but actually the relationship she has with my trainer. And I know that she provides free services to my trainer, because the idea then is the trainer recommends to her base, which is about 20 people. So the goal here always is that the lifetime value is bigger than the CAC. And in Silicon Valley, where I live, we have a lot of companies that didn't get that right. and ultimately they go out of business. And an example that has nothing to do with your industry, but is perhaps amusing, there was a company called Sprig that was doing real-time online high-end lunch deliveries to people in downtown San Francisco. And the idea was, well, how hard can it be? Because Uber is on demand. So what if we just had Uber with food in the back? And they didn't think about some key logistic things like food safety and refrigeration, and the fact you've got to plan everything the night before. So there's a lot of predictive modeling that doesn't get right. But what they found is they spent $50 per customer acquisition cost. And the average customer resulted in a single purchase of a $13 lunch. If they got lucky, 2, and then they went away. So the CAC was 50, the lifetime value was between 13 and 26. Company went out of business, right? So just things to think about over time in terms of how you manage your resources. And Francisco, thank you for that note there. You mentioned that you spend about $35 to $50 a lead. How do you spend that money? Do you mind going off mute for a moment and sharing with us how you know that?
Yeah, definitely. So a lot of us come from Google, both organically and paid ad campaigns. So
Okay.
that's where the bulk of that money goes towards. Of course, it costs us more to get a Google lead, but
Yeah.
they're also more prone to turn into paying customers compared to a Facebook or Instagram or whatever it may be. So basically, if I take how much I spend per month on marketing between like Google, Facebook, and sometimes even like printed materials and stuff to give around, and divide by the number of leads inquiries I get per month, it comes down to about that range right there.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And you bring up a great point, which is that you can do multiple social media channels. Like nobody's going to stop you from doing Instagram and Facebook and Google, but there's really not a lot of point if some aren't that effective, or they're bringing in customers from a demographic you actually don't want because they turn out to be one-timers, or they struggle to pay, or they're just pains in the butt, right? And Google is, we always joke, have you gotten your check from Google? Because you're making them a lot of money, and certain AdWords are often more expensive than others. The other thing to think about with Google is just how much total you want to spend, because marketing can be like a bottomless pit in terms of spend without results if you're not careful. Chrissy, you had a question. Is the denominator of CAC the number of new customers, or the amount of their cumulative lifetime value? So yeah, a CAC is what it takes to get a new customer. And then lifetime value is once they're a customer, how much they spend. So you think about it on a per customer basis, not in aggregate, but you get that per customer basis by dividing by the total number of customers that you get in. All right, so kind of moving quickly here, and do jump in here with questions. Thank you for that, Christy. We'll also have some time at the end for questions. So I just want to make sure we can get to questions as they arise. Let's talk a little bit about, okay, so we've sort of got a process for strategy and strategic planning. We want to think about who we're serving and what's important to them. When we've got that down, what does this mean on a day-to-day basis, right? In terms of how we allocate our time, how we manage our staff so they allocate their time, and the decisions that we make, because every day involves big and little decisions. Do we take out a loan for a $40,000 machine? Big decision. Do I need to fire somebody because they haven't shown up for work for a week? Big decision. Do we provide free samples in the waiting room if you have a practice where people come to you? Small decision, but it's still a decision that should ultimately go back to, why do we exist? What's the environment we're trying to create for our customer? What's the message we're sending to the customer? And is this the right way we want to allocate our resources? So one thing to think about is the kind of culture that you create in order to enable this very focused, clear strategy decision-making, and time management process. And culture is one of these weird amorphous things where we know it exists, we know when it's not good, but it's kind of hard to define. And many times, especially when we are overwhelmed, when, in the best case, we have more clients than we can handle, more growth than we can handle, it gets a little bit crazy. And in some ways that can be good, and others it can actually get pretty chaotic. The other aspect of this is if you're under stress, having not enough resources, or, whether it's money or just people, it can create an environment where people are working like they're fighting fires, which also sort of gets away from thinking strategically and doing a good job with time management and decision making. So this is just a way to frame and think about where you're at with your organization right now versus perhaps where you want to be. And the dynamics here are like the level of energy, is it high or low? And the direction of energy. Is it intentional, purposeful, strategic? Or is it go along to get along? Or is it really crazy because we're just trying to get things done and live minute to minute versus thinking more intentionally about the day? And energy falls into a multitude of components, but we know when it's not good. And I just encourage you to look at this and kind of reflect on where is your practice right now versus where you want to be. If you work on your own, the social component can be a big one, right? Do you feel isolated, or do you actually have a good network and feel part of a team? You know, are you just exhausted at the end of every day, or do you go into work and actually get energized from it? And do you feel like your team is really committed, or are they there just for a paycheck? This is a sort of diagnostic that you can run through with yourself or your team and just say, okay, are we where we want to be, or there is a big gap and we actually need to figure out a plan to close that gap. You can also think about it in terms of like kind of productive versus corrosive, comfortable, resigned energy. This is just another way of looking at the same thing. I personally just find this energy assessment work super interesting. I don't think enough companies think about somatics and how just simple energy, positive or negative, impacts how people get along, how they do their work, and how successful an organization is. And, given the work that you do, you actually have a really interesting, unique lens into this, right? You're very sensitive to it because you detect it with the animals. You probably detect it with their owners. Here's the thing, most people don't. So you already have a leg up on that. And I would just say use that intelligence to be intentional about the culture and the energy that you want to create, because that will help you more with things around delegating, time management, and decision making. And when we have too much to do, right, it's easy to get snippy, it's easy to get rude, and you can feel this, like what you do is time consuming in terms of working with your patients. There's no way around it. And sometimes you have to, if you've got an owner there and they're asking annoying questions and you really want them to hurry up and go away. So it's human nature to just get frustrated with trying to balance many things at a time, as well as perhaps the emotional anxieties of the patient's owner who might be there during the visit. So here's another framework just to think about in terms of, okay, so a lot going on. I got to think about where I'm most value add, like where are my services, my time, my energy most valuable for the practice, most productive? And then how can I get things off my plate that aren't? Now, if you work by yourself, this is going to be more about just putting things in a parking lot, a kind of mental parking lot, or maybe outsourcing and having staff that you have on like an hourly basis that you have to help you with certain things. If you're part of a larger practice, this is something to think about in terms of how you set up roles and delegate across your team. And the context here is think about what you do and what's most important to your client. And that is your value proposition, right? So that's core. What's non-core are things all around that. And that may be anything from making decorating decisions to more like administrative, like billing, that you could perhaps have someone else do. And then what's a crisis? Like, what is so urgent it has to be dealt with right now? You've got a client on the line, they're upset, they need to talk about treatment, they only want to talk to you. Got it. That is important. You need to deal with that. But if it's something that's actually not urgent, it could wait till tomorrow, wait till next week, you can delegate. This is a template that actually is really helpful. Like, if your week is sort of a Monday to Monday, Sunday night, look at your schedule, look at your to-do list, and figure out where you can allocate things across this 4 quadrants, this chart here, because it actually helps bring a little bit of a sense of, okay, how do I focus and prioritize across the week? And where is there a big gap? Like, I may need to make some fundamental structural changes because it just can't all get done. I need more help. I need to say no. I need to actually stop doing certain things. And this is sort of another way of sort of thinking about this in terms of the 4 Ds, right? Do you delete it, delay it, delegate it, or just diminish it? Find a faster way to get things done. I know I'm making this all sound very easy, but when you have too much to do, it really does require somewhat ruthless prioritization. You know, this is about kind of protecting your business, your mental health, and being more sustainable. And that can mean saying no, which is hard for a lot of us. So as I'm talking through this, I would say take a moment for yourself and sketch this out. Draw a map of how you spend your time today. And what I want you to think about are those 3 bubbles at the bottom of the page, and write the bubble based on the size of the time relative to the others that you spend on it right now. So how big is the bubble for where you currently spend your time at work? How big is the bubble that you currently spend with your family and friends? And how big is the bubble that you spend doing what you love? I use the term hobbies here, but it can be anything that doesn't involve work, that doesn't necessarily involve family and friends, but it's a passion that you have. So where does that look like right now? And then where would you like it to be? Most of us, it's not the same thing. And for most of us, work takes up way too much time. Family doesn't get enough time. Hobbies don't get enough time. Although with, you know, various levels of quarantine, some of us may be spending more time with our family than we really ever wanted to. But the key here is just to get an alignment for yourself. Because in particular, if you lead a practice, if you lead a group, if you have a team, you want to get this in order for yourself in order to help those around you also focus and delegate and manage their time. So you don't need to, you know, share this with anyone, but it's just something to think about in terms of what plan you have to strategically spend more time doing what you're interested in. All right, let's get to the last part and then we can open this up for questions and discussion. So how do you know if you're being successful? What are the metrics that you measure for success? And, you know, metrics are a funny thing because most of us think about metrics in terms of, well, you know, did I get revenue in? Did I manage my costs okay? You know, did I get X number of new clients? And in some cases, it may be more qualitative, like we did a survey and our clients expressed a certain net promoter score, or we got a certain number of positive versus negative comments. I don't recommend having more than a handful of metrics. Like here it shows maybe 4 on the left side. If you're a bigger practice, like if you're a full operating veterinary hospital and this is a component of it, you may already have a lot of metrics that are automatically measured through a software system. But I'm guessing a number of you don't have that. And so then it's a question of how much effort do I put in to collect this information and how useful then is it? There aren't any standards, but in general, it's, are you getting paid? Are you managing your costs? And are your clients happy? And does that relate back to your strategic plan in terms of where you want to be in revenue growth, where you want to be in managing your costs, and where you want to be in terms of either client happiness, success, or new client acquisition, right? That get, keep, grow process. And so one of the things to think about, and this is just the last workshop, sort of worksheet I'll leave you with, is maybe pick 3 metrics, nothing overwhelming. And then think about the following. How often are you going to measure it, right? It doesn't make sense to measure most things every day, sometimes not even every week, usually every month. But it takes effort to measure it. So think about what's most useful for you, because metrics give you a sense of health for your business. And they also tell you if you're on track, off track, and what you need to modify if you're off track. The second thing is, what's the data I need to measure that metric? Now, financial stuff can sometimes be easy, sometimes not, right? I mean, how much revenue you get in, great. But there are questions like, when do you recognize the revenue? And do you get paid at the point of service, or do you have to bill afterwards? What's the lag time? How many of your clients are defaulting? But think about, like, how easily can I collect that data? What systems do I have right now that just do that for me? And if I don't have them, is there like a software tool I could put in place? Or is there some way I could have someone on my team collect this data on a regular basis? And then finally, that last piece, which is really, again, just, is it automated, or do I have to put extra effort or a process in place to get the data so that we can incorporate it into our regular decision making? And Danielle, a good question here about staff retention. So staff retention is probably, I mean, this is not a metric that changes so much you would be measuring it like on a weekly basis. Maybe monthly if it changes a lot, usually annually. So you may have goals around staff retention, and they aren't always immediately obvious. I mean, for some, you don't actually want 100% staff retention, because that indicates that people are not moving on, and you don't get like fresh, sort of revitalized people. In some cases, structurally, it doesn't make sense, because you might have a lot of students that come in, intern with you, and the goal is then they go back out to whatever programs that they're in. But also, if you have a team you love, right, and if you're lucky enough to have that, you may not want to have any changes in staff retention. So your goal is to have 100%. The other aspect here too are retirements. Do you know structurally that some people are going to be rolling out and you need to replace them? So staff retention is an interesting one, because full 100% staff retention doesn't necessarily mean success. Because it can also mean lack of management, like somebody's really crap, but like we just don't have the time to manage them out, or we worry that we don't have resources to replace them. And you don't want to fall into that trap. In my view, it's worse having somebody on the team that's a non-contributor than just not having them at all, because there can often be this negative influence around that person that impacts others, whether it's just culturally and the energy in the organization, or creating actual mistakes that can cost you. Great. All right, so I've gone through most of my slides here. I kind of rushed through those because I wanted to leave time here for questions. And why don't we at this point open it up for the questions? Feel free to put that in the chat, or which is probably easiest, and then I can just see where the questions are and take folks off mute so we can have more of a discussion around this.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Whitney. Thank you so much for the presentation. Let's give them a couple of minutes just to see if anyone has any questions. They can just pop it in to the little chat bar at the bottom. You'll see at the bottom of your screen, guys, you have a live now. So if you have any questions, please do go ahead. Yeah, thank you so much, Whitney. That was amazing. I see we have here Heather asking, will you please be able to share the slides with us?
Absolutely. Yeah. And everything I've given you here, I mean, all this is open source. I think more and more these days that there's less of this concern about proprietary access to tools. Absolutely. My goal is just to keep things really simple and not like kind of academic and complicated, so that they're practical for your business. Dawn, you had a question about preparing a practice for sale or partnership. Yeah. So that's probably a longer question than we have time for here today, but I can certainly reflect on what I've seen. So and Christy, I'll get to you next here. So one of the things that I've seen with veterinary practices in the U.S. is that when it comes time for a vet to want to retire, they have a problem in the sense that they have been running their business on paper at very low margins for tax purposes. And then when it comes time to sell, it often feels like it's a fire sale, like they're just not getting very much money for it. So that is something to be aware of. The partnership side is really interesting. I don't know that there's any one good model, but generally what I've seen is that it's someone comes in in a non-partnership role, so that you see if this relationship, right? It's kind of like a marriage, is going to work out, because on paper things can look really good in terms of skill set, dynamics, and synergies. But it is a lot more than that, right? It's like cultural attitudes around how you want to manage the practice, how you want to spend money, how you handle clients, how you even like spend time, right? Are you very, very specific about start and end time of appointments? Are you a little bit softer about that? And so, giving at least a year to work that out before having the partnership discussion is important. But the ability to become a partner is a huge motivator for many top, vets or younger practitioners to join a practice. So it's definitely a key piece in attracting top talent. Christy, go ahead and ask your question, please.
So I'm a student still in a DVM program, and am interested in general practice and have a practice that I'm interested in either buying into or buying out. But also am interested in vet rehab and some of the modalities that we use. And so I'm in an acupuncture course right now, for example. And I want to be able to practice that, but the clients that we have and the doctors at the current practice, like the current general practice I'm working with, I don't think I'm going to be able to practice acupuncture as much as I would if I were able to like kind of take my show on the road.
Yeah.
So my question is around like trying to navigate the decision really to kind of become an associate at a practice and work toward, buying that practice where then I can kind of shape what we do, versus spending a little bit more time with a show on the road type model where I can apply these specialized skills that I have and continue to build those, and navigating sort of that like non-compete world and like no moonlighting clauses and stuff like that.
Yeah. And that's become more and more of a, I don't know if it's an issue, but it's definitely more of a conversation topic as we see more women go into vet med who want to have more independence for work-life balance purposes. And so you see things pop up like out here. Fuzzy Health was offering, and they offer telemedicine. They were doing home visits for a while, and it was mostly women who wanted to moonlight or just like work for themselves. So I think there is definitely a big shift that direction. Specific to your area of interest in acupuncture, there's actually, I'm going to put my email here in the chat, and feel free to follow up with me directly. There's an excellent acupuncturist, Dr. Barbie out of Texas, who previously was part of a practice, then went off on her own to do acupuncture. And she actually comes out here to California once a month to work with us. And I think she would be a great person for you to talk to in terms of how to navigate this. Because at the end of the day, it comes down to what's most important to you. And if independence and autonomy are hugely important, then working for yourself, despite it being highly, it's stressful, it's risky, it's all these other things, but it may be the type of lifestyle that's better suited for what you want to do until you can find a practice that's actually really excited about incorporating in acupuncture. There's also 2 women I've been working with out here in California called Vestas Vet, that are working to figure out how to improve the access to loans, like just navigating that structure for acquiring small business loans, and purchasing veterinary practices, specifically for female ownership. So I can share more information about that as well. So yeah, lots of things packed into that, but it is in some ways a personal decision if you haven't, met that right match. And I actually don't know many, where we are, it's mostly solo practitioners in the equine space. And then with acupuncture for small animal, I don't actually see it integrated much in the small animal vet practices out here. It's mostly independent people that come to your home.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please hit the subscribe button so you get notified every time I load a new podcast. And please, if you get a moment, head over to Stitcher or iTunes and leave me a review. It's a really lonely job being a podcaster, and so the only time I get to hear from you or know that you're out there is when I get a review. And know that I read every single one of your reviews. So to those of you that have left reviews, I want to say a very, very big thank you. Every time we get a review, it really helps to get the Veterinary Rehabilitation Podcast out there to all the vet rehabbers all over the world. Alright, vet rehabbers, so if you are looking for more continuing education in the field of veterinary rehabilitation, head over to onlinepethealth.com. Go be awesome, guys.